Hello again, friends. Katie here. Today I want to talk about North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I actually already filmed this video once. It's really frustrating when you sit down to talk about a book that you really enjoyed and you can't think of the words. I filmed over 12 minutes of footage and it was just a mess. I wasn't all there, I guess. So I'm back again and I hope that I can do a better job. Now, my reading experience with this book might be a little different than other reading experiences. I saw the BBC miniseries a couple of years ago for the first time, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the story. I loved Mr. Thornton. I somewhat enjoyed Margaret. But ever since, that's kind of a go-to when I'm feeling like something a little bit more serious, something, like a period film. That's what I go for. So I really love it. And I was very anxious to read the book. North and South is a story of a woman named Margaret Hale. She is a young lady living in the mid-1800s and has grown up sort of in her aunt's house in London, but she's from the south of England. And once she is done living with her aunt, she moves from the south of England with her parents to the north and ultimately ends up in a manufacturing town called Milton, which is actually just code for Manchester. So in Milton, things are a lot different from the south, which is kind of your idyllic farming community. Milton is like dirty and busy, and it's a lot about trade, which Margaret isn't used to. People are hard because life is hard, and it takes a lot of getting used to for her. She learns a lot along the way. That's of course the story. And of course there is sort of a love story between Margaret and Mr. Thornton, who is one of the mill owners. And this is kind of where the similarities to Pride and Prejudice come in. They start out with kind of like a contentious relationship, and honestly, it takes a long time for them to even become friends. I found it really interesting when I started to do a little digging on this book that Charles Dickens edited it, and he called it wearisome to the last degree, mostly because Elizabeth Gaskell was writing it as a serial and she was paid by the page. So the more she kind of meandered with her words, the more money she would ultimately make. That makes North and South a really long book. And it's one of those classics that I think a lot of people are intimidated by. I sure was. And I don't know if I exactly agree with Charles Dickens, but it was a bit of a slog. Much like her other novels, Elizabeth Gaskell spends North and South kind of talking about social issues in England at the time, and kind of challenging her characters to deal with those social issues. So the biggest thing happening in the book is kind of Margaret pushing back against the idea of manufacturing and trade, the injustices of the life of a worker who gets nothing for pay and starves most of the time anyway. Margaret is very outspoken throughout the book about her opinions of how these workers are treated, which is why she kind of comes up against Mr. Thornton, who in the book is actually quite a level-headed and fair person. He isn't really the bad guy that the movie sort of makes him out to be at first. There's a lot less conflict there, and it's just more about Margaret not understanding the way things work. Mr. Thornton kind of comes up against the challenge of having a business. There's a strike, and it's just a huge mess for everybody. Everybody suffers in the strike. So in between all of what's happening, Margaret is constantly bringing up the living conditions of workers, the way they spend their time, how unfair it is that they work and live and suffer and die, and then the masters have all this money and they're rich. And there's a lot of comparison between what it means to suffer in the south of England versus what it means to suffer in the north of England. It's a bit unusual because in my experience of reading novels about women set in the mid-19th century, they're usually kind of learning to be prim and proper ladies and don't step out of your bounds and follow the rules. But I'm not actually sure that's a lesson that Margaret learns. Maybe she learns how to handle herself as a woman rather than acting kind of like a child about something. She's very much not aware of her own feelings and her own emotions. There are several characters who throughout the novel kind of say, hey, I actually like that she's speaking her mind about this issue and I'm willing to talk to her about it. So the book does a lot of challenging gender roles in that way, which is kind of unique for a story of the time, I would say. Now, as I said, the book is a little bit rambly. Gaskell definitely spares no detail that can be included, and sometimes conversations become very long and you really have to be paying attention because they're about these intense social and political issues that are kind of plaguing England at the time. Especially if you don't have kind of a background knowledge about the situation, it might lose you for a second. I was lucky enough to take a very in-depth history class about 19th century England, and I'm glad that I had that behind me because I understood the growth of the Industrial Revolution, the way that people reacted, the dynamic between the classes and between people in power and people without power. I guess I would say that's something that I was glad to have coming to this book, but I don't think you need it. I think you can still enjoy it even if you are not fully aware of what happened leading up to and during the Industrial Revolution in England. So I think that's about all I have to say. Overall, it was an enjoyable book, but part of what made it good for me was looking forward to the parts that I knew were in the movie. And interestingly enough, go figure, when I went back to watch the movie or the miniseries, I found that I was not as satisfied with it as I used to be because it cut so much out of the book. A lot happens, but to be honest, most of it is important. And it's a lot of work that culminates in some pretty good payoff. I don't know if I would say watch the miniseries before or after. I enjoyed it before, but that's just me, and some people don't really want to spoil that for themselves. But I was still able to kind of create the book in my head, my own version, without allowing the miniseries to kind of muddle that up. So I hope that you'll consider reading this book. If you haven't, if you have read it, please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts and feelings, and let me know whether or not you disliked Margaret, because I really did for a long time. But she grew on me. And also we can talk about Mr. Thornton because he's lovely and wonderful. I really like him, just personally. So that's about all I have to say about North and South. I will see you guys next time. Bye.